so we actually have a time frame for this particular one, in the coming decade, China will emerge as a global leader in technology innovation. While you are all voting, I will introduce the issue. For decades, following China's opening up to the world in the late 1970s and early 1980s, it relied on adapting existing technologies rather than taking a leading role in global innovation. More recently, however, the Chinese government and private sector have endeavored to pivot from adaptation to innovation by aggressively pursuing research and development efforts. And this push has won China major successes in developing new technologies and fostering new industries. Flagship companies like Tencent, Alibaba, and Baidu are just a few examples of how China's drive to be on the cutting edge of innovation carries with it a global impact. From internet finance to artificial intelligence to bike-sharing companies, it appears to some that China may be paving the way to the future. Skeptics are quick to point out, however, that technological innovation isn't solely customer-based or efficiency-focused. They suggest that Chinese innovation will ultimately be stymied by its restrictive political and educational systems. And with that, I will look at all of your votes. I hope you have all registered your votes. You have a challenge in front of you. We have 65% voting in favor of the proposition and 34% voting against it. So with that, I'm going to introduce our two debaters. To my right, Huang Can. Dr. Huang Can is a professor, head of Department of Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Strategy, as well as co-director of the Institute for Intellectual Property Management at the School of Management at Zhejiang University. And I want to thank all of our Chinese speakers and debaters for coming so far to participate today, and do so in English, which is not your mother tongue. And then to my left, we have Adam Segal, who is Ira Lipman Chair in Emerging Technologies and National Security and Director of the Digital and Cyberspace Policy Program at the Council for Foreign Relations. So you get 15 minutes each, and we'll start with you, Dr. Huang.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bonnie Glaze. It's my great honor and pleasure here being in Washington, D.C. To join this debate with distinguished scholar Adam Segal. I've read Adam's work before when I was doing my PhD, so it's quite an honor to meet in person. So to start my presentation, I have prepared some slides. First, I would like to introduce the 7 technologies that China is currently leading the world to develop these technologies, and trying to convince you that China will emerge as global leader, but it's emerging, it's right now, action. And later, I will explain why China is able to developing these cutting-edge technologies and the reasons behind China's ascent. I summarize into 3 sources of competitive advantages. The first one, China has a large and massive domestic market. It helps Chinese company to reap return from innovation. And secondly, China has centralized power and a willingness to employ state-sponsored industry policies, just as Senator Coney has mentioned this morning, to promote industrial technology development. The third, that we are living in a globalized world, and globalization helping Chinese company to engage in technology learning and upgrading. So now the first slide. So the first technology I want to highlight is the high-speed railway technologies. In the last 10 years, China has built 22,000 kilometers high-speed railway lines in the country, which accounted for 60% of the world's total. And in the picture, this Fuxing model train can run at a speed of 400 kilometers per hour, and now it's currently running at 350 kilometers between Shanghai and Beijing, which is the highest speed of running high-speed train in the world. Next. The second technology is the internet technologies, just as Bonnie has mentioned. We know the story of Alibaba and Tencent and so on. So showcase of this China's strengths in this area is just a single-day global shopping festival, which just happened every November 11th annually. So in last weekend, we just had another single day. In this day, the transaction amounted to $25.4 billion in Alibaba's platform, which is double of the sales volume of the Thanksgiving Friday and Cyber Monday in the US altogether in 2016. And in the peak period in the last weekend, Alibaba's platform is able to process 256,000 transactions per second. And an ability to processing this massive number of transactions per second just demonstrate capability of the company in terms of big data, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and virtual reality. Next. The third area is the energy area. In May this year, China's engineers able to extract methane hydrates off the coast of Guangdong province in the South China Sea. And as you know, these resources, methane hydrate, what is also now called combustible ice, is very abundant fossil fuel resources in the earth. And at the current estimation, they can sustain the world's consumption, gas consumption, for 80 to 800 years, and it's clean. And so in China and Japan reported successful extraction of these resources. Next. The fourth case is quantum communication. In last year, China launched the first quantum satellite into space. In this June, Chinese scientists reported they are able to beaming the photons between the satellites and the base station on the ground. And then they find that the particles remain in the quantum status, link quantum status, at a record-breaking distance of 1,200 kilometers. And this major breakthrough clear hurdles for building the future ultra-secure quantum internet or the space-based quantum internet. Next, the next technologies in the telecommunication industry is invented by Huawei company in 2008. So this is called single RAN. So before the single RAN technology was invented, the carriers has to build the cabins for each generation of mobile telecommunication technology in the base station. For example, they have to build one cabin for the technology, for the communication technology, and they have to build another one for battery, another one for backup battery. So then, with a single RAN, they can put all of the cabins into one chassis, which is down of the picture, and then they will greatly save the capital expenses and expenditures for the carriers. So then, after Huawei invented technology, it later just became industry standards. In one conference, the CEO of Vodafone was asked, what distinguished Vodafone from Deutsche Telekom? And he said, we have a single RAN from Huawei. Next. So this area is the construction and engineering area, and China is building the Hong Kong, Zhuhai, Macau bridge. And this bridge is the longest bridge overseas so what has ever built. It's 20 times in length compared with San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge. But the most difficult part is not upwater construction, it's the underwater tunnel. There were 4.5 miles underwater tunnels, and Chinese engineers built 33 structures of this underwater tunnel. Each of them is as the size as an aircraft carrier. But then when they laid on the seafloor, they had to be the accuracy of the degree of the centimeters. And they will be able to do that, and that's the first time but done in the world. And this laid this massive structure on the seafloor, but with this accuracy. Next. The last area has been mentioned by Senator Coney as well this morning. So it's a supercomputer. And China now hosts two spots, first two spots in this competition in the world. And Switzerland hold the third. US hold I think the fifth or the sixth. So in total, about 500 fast computers in the world. Now there are 202 reside in China. So then I hope I give you a description that China is not will emerge as technology leader, actually is emerging at this moment in a broad spectrum of technologies. So why China is able to doing that? I offer three reasons. First, let me elaborate. It's domestic size. So economists has been arguing that the market size is important determinant of innovation activities. So all else equal, when you have a greater demand, you have a greater revenue of income when you introduce innovation in that market. And when we look at the history of the United States, after Second World War, in a quarter of a century of time, a lot of innovation actually were developed by Europeans and companies, but it was brought in by the US companies to commercialize in US first. So that's because of the US company has enjoyed significantly from the nature resource-intensive, capital-intensive operation. The economy of scale is so large in the US that can give US firms upper hands in commercialize these technologies invented elsewhere in the world. So if we see this dynamic play now in China, and as China is predicted to overtake the United States to become the largest economy by 2030, so we can see the China's company, also China has an advantage in this sense. The second point is about the industry policy. So the scholar also have argued that American technology leadership in the early post-war era also reflect Americans' government, also private industry's massive investment in R&D, also in scientific and technical education. So many countries emulate the US model, including China. They spare no efforts to boost their investment in R&D. And also important to mention that most of the structure and centralized power that China ran this planned economy has been in place now. So although there was debate, but the Chinese policymaker has no reservation and hesitation to use industry policy to boost technological learning. And there's no taboo. There's no ideology taboo. So then there were more policy instruments at its disposal at the Chinese government compared with the governments in the West. I can give you a concrete example, which is the wind power industry. So in 2005, virtually the installed wind power capacity in China was virtually zero, and China relied heavily on equipment import from Europe. But then in 2006, China's government launched a comprehensive policy to mapping the wind resources in the country. This only can be done by governments, and private industry cannot do this. And they also set up a technological standard and also a quality inspection system for ensure the quality. And they also give the R&D grants to the companies. Most importantly, they set up these concession projects, also preferential feed-in tariff for wind power electricity into the state grids. So with this policy, the domestic market very quickly took off. And by the end of 2013, the cumulative installed capacity of the wind power in China has already become largest in the world, accounting 30% of the world's total. So when the market took off, also the same as for the industry. So by 2017, among the top 10 wind turbine manufacturers in the world, there are 3 from China, the Goldwind, Guodian, and Mingyang. So the third point, the last point about globalization. In this globalized world, as Senator Cornyn has rightly emphasized, Chinese companies need not develop every cutting-edge technology on their own. They can buy it, right? They can engage in acquisition and merger to acquire these technologies. So in last year, China only traded the United States in the world in terms of outward foreign direct investments. So among these projects, there were 742 for merger acquisition involving foreign companies. So in total transaction volume, that's $100 billion US dollars. So many of them are aiming at technologies and also other resources. So there were examples for this. You already heard about that before, I guess. There were Lenovo acquire IBM's low-end servers and Motorola handset business. There were Geely acquire Swedish Volvo from Ford Motors. There were Sanyi Group, China's largest equipment manufacturer, acquire Postmaster, German Mittelstand, in 2012. So as the Chinese company upgrading technologically, and the competition within Chinese market has been increasingly fierce. So foreign multinationals, they will be increasingly tempted, also maybe sometimes forced, to deploy their most advanced technology in Chinese market. Thank you. And this will create competition effects, labor mobility effects, and demonstration effects, and what economists call spillover. So that will, in turn, help Chinese companies to absorb this spillover to even upgrade their capability further. So I want to show you one evidence for this spillover effect. If you can move on one slide. So last slide is my own research. So in the right-hand side, right-hand axis, that's the number of the theoretic patents in the world. So theoretic patents is a patent family which are sought protection in the US, Europe, Japan at the same time. So there were 3 patents were protected in these 3 jurisdictions, but cover the same technology. It's very expensive to patent internationally. So if the company want to seek these theoretic patents, they are willing to spend, for example, around $200,000 US for one piece. So in 2007, there were about 70,000 most valuable technologies that's been invented and patented in the world. So in the left axis, that's how many percentage of this patent family were also sought protection in a 4th country, right, beyond US, Europe, and Japan. So then you can see in the beginning, Canada, Australia emerging as the top candidate country because those are high-income countries. If you want to sell iPhone, you would definitely want to sell in Australia and Canada. But gradually you see China has been overtaking these 2 countries. And in 2007, there's about 70% of the world's most valuable technology are also sought protection in China. Means the multinational company that deploy this technology in China seek patent protection. So this gives you evidence that how many advanced technology are flow in and flow out, and also being used in China in their sites or their partners. So compared with China, other BRICS countries, India, Russia, South Africa, and other countries are not that the ratio, the percentage is not that high, are hovering around 20%. So to conclude, the increasing size of China's economy, government support, intensify globalization have Chinese companies rising to a level which is on a par with their counterparts in the United States, Germany, and Japan. Indeed, given that similarity, we observe that Americans' technology dominance in the 20th century, American rise, and today's the force at work in China, we are likely to see that history repeat itself, ushering an age of Chinese global technology leadership. Thank you very much.
Okay, Adam, floor is yours.
Hey, thank you. First, I want to thank CSIS for inviting me to participate. You can all rest assured I was not a high school debater. Unlike Joshua and Evan, although I did win the Tennessee State History competition 2 years in a row. So I don't know how that's going to play itself out. But I did learn from Evan that I should say proposition many times. My proposition is. My proposition is that we have to define innovation, we have to define global, and we have to define decade. And so I'm going to narrow the focus to innovation, a specific focus on innovation, which is science-based and new to the world, because this is increasingly where China wants to be. And of all of the impressive lists that Dr. Huang mentioned, really quantum might be the only one that falls in that list. So if we're talking about a very specific, narrow set of innovations, China is not there yet. Market innovation, process innovation, incremental innovation, China has clearly emerged, and I will concede that point. But as we're moving towards new to the world innovation, I think China has some significant challenges. And many of the challenges are things that Dr. Huang listed as strengths. In particular, what the Chinese government has to do is shift a model of innovation that's been based on catch-up to one that is managing uncertainty, right? Because big science, new to the world, AI, other areas, biogenomics, those are all highly characterized by uncertainty. We have no idea where those technologies are going. We have no idea how the science is going to develop. And Chinese policy infrastructure is not in place for that world. Now, China recognizes that. If you look at the policy innovation that China is discussing, it is to create an innovation-driven development strategy. And so it recognizes this move towards uncertainty. It talks about centralizing funding and creating new platforms. It has a greater coordination of funding. It has much greater project management flexibility, which was a huge issue in the old system. It is looking at technology transfer from universities, and is increasingly looking at personnel issues. Those are all things that the Chinese government knows it needs to address, but they're not there yet, and it's going to take certainly longer than a decade to put those systems in place, because we're talking both about policy change and cultural change, right? How science is managed and run in China. And here I think there are at least 4 major problems. The first one is I would use one of Dr. Huang's major strengths as a major weakness. So that is industrial policy and government oversight. And we have reached the end of the stage where government top-down policy is helping drive China, and they need to, as I said, move to a different model. The issue right now is government top-down incentives are affecting where scientists do their work, right? They are looking to their local and provincial authorities about where that money is coming from, and that's how they're directing their work, which is essentially meaning that connected scientists in China are the ones that are the most funded, older scientists are the ones that are most funded, and scientists that spend most of their time cultivating these researchers are the ones that are most funded. So the top-down driven mechanism is distorting away a lot of the money is funded. We should remember that China only spends 5% on basic research. 84% of the money goes to development, and 10% goes to applied. So even with all these large projects, very little of that money is going to basic research. The top-down focus also means that much of the money, if not most of the money, is going to state-owned enterprises. Right, so there has been a dramatic shift from R&D out of government labs and universities to industry, but the vast majority of that is in state-owned enterprises. Tencent, Huawei, Alibaba are the exceptions, right? They're exceptions we can count on maybe 2 hands, but the vast majority are state-owned enterprises, and they are still doing very inefficient R&D, and they are squeezing out the private sector, which is likely to continue in President Xi's reign. But this private sector still has massive problems in accessing funding, land, and other information that's going there. And to put on top of that, we see the CCP increasing its control on tech companies in the private sector, right? Both asserting its control through party sales, but also you may have seen the reporting about wanting to take stakes in private companies and the tech companies so it can exert greater control over them as it moves forward. So shift to industry is happening, but it's happening in state-owned enterprises that are funding inefficient research. The third is a widespread culture of corruption and fraud, right? Since 2012, China has had to retract more scientific papers than every other country in the world combined, right? There are massive black markets and underlying markets for peer research, fake papers, and others. The last numbers I have on corruption is that the estimate is in 2014 is that 60% of all R&D funding is lost to corruption. Right, so even as China has increased its percentage of R&D to over 2%, becoming the second largest spender in the world, 60% is lost to corruption. Right? Part of that is, again, an impact of government industrial policy, top-down. Right? The government has decided that the SCI, the Science Citation Index, is the most important marker of scientific accomplishment, and so scientists try to produce those papers. And so we see a massive as I said, market in fake papers and plagiarism and cheating. Also very important, it undermines the culture of collaboration that's so important to the next generation of innovation. Right? Scientists only get credit in China on the SCI index if they're the first author listed, right? So there's no incentives for others to collaborate and move forward. So a real problem moving there. Fourth, as Bonnie mentioned in her opening comments, is the political environment, or the Great Firewall in short, right? So the idea that how do you create an innovation system without the free flow of information? I don't think it is a huge barrier, quite honestly. Enough information flows in China that we are clearly seeing excellent scientific work, but it certainly has a cost, right? We saw with the removal of Google in China, in surveys done, those that were hurt the most tended to be scientists and technology entrepreneurs, because they were using Google Scholar and Google Docs for collaboration. And we also have what the NYU scholar Clay Shirky calls a strategy tax, right, for the going out of Chinese firms. So the Great Firewall not only keeps information out, but has hurt Chinese firms going out themselves. And a great example here is Xiaomi, right? And Xiaomi in 2014 was greater than Uber. The market size was larger than Uber. It seemed as if Xiaomi was going to be unstoppable. But the fact is that Xiaomi had to create two operating systems, one in China and one in the West, because of the Great Firewall. And consumers became increasingly suspicious of Xiaomi because of data privacy concerns in other markets. And that is certainly going to be a problem for China as it globalizes, especially in AI. Right? We can already see concerns about Chinese Internet of Things devices, who collects the data, where the data goes, and with AI and facial recognition, language processing, all these other areas, it is clearly going to be a major issue for the Chinese firms to globalize. So if we think, again, 10 years, cultural change takes a long time. Innovation on a narrow set of science-based, new to the world, and global, I think it's very clear that China has some significant barriers in there. Let me end with, I think, which are two further uncertainties. And the first one is, quite honestly, we have no idea how to measure innovation any longer. Right? Our models on innovation, as Dr. Huang said, come out of the post-World War where we had the NSF, we had universities, we had several companies, and we have measures that are based on patents, GDP investment, some very kind of traditional national metrics of innovation. That world really doesn't exist any longer for global innovation. Right? Innovation is now spread into many, many constitutive points. It's happening in many, many different markets at the same time. And so how we think about how national systems interact with global systems, I think, is a fundamental intellectual challenge we have not put our mind around. And so this uncertainty about China's emergence, I think, is even greater. The second and final point I'll make goes back to another strength that Dr. Huang mentioned, is globalization. And it is clear that the great winners from the globalizations of science and technology were China and the United States. Right? China, in part because of not only the investment in China upgrading technology, MNCs inside of China doing R&D, but the vast emigration of Chinese scientists and students who did their training in the United States and Europe and Australia and brought those skills back. And the US clearly benefited from all of that, from Chinese scientists working in US labs, starting companies in Silicon Valley. But that age of science and technology may also be ending, right? I was not here for the speech this morning, but I suspect that the overtone of it was that China's acquisition of science and technology is an increasing threat to the United States. And that's just not simply in the United States. That is true in Europe and Australia and other places as well. And we are thinking about how do we unravel the two systems. I think that's going to be impossible. US and Chinese technology systems are too interconnected to ever unravel, but it's going to raise the costs for both of them. And I think in the short term, at least, that will be a larger stumbling block for China than it will for the United States, although in the end, it will hurt us both.
Okay, terrific. We now move on. We just lost our microphones. They're all down. If you just wait 1 minute, maybe our IT people or somebody can bring me up a microphone. Thank you, Kaya. Okay, while our IT people are rebooting our system, we'll share the microphone up here. We're going to move on to 5 minutes rebuttal for each of our speakers. Over to you, Dr. Huang.
Yeah, okay. So I stand up. Oh, this is on.
Yeah, that's on? Okay. All of these are on.
So thanks for Dr. Segal's presentation. So I just come to discuss the points, his point that's from the beginning. That clearly this proposition does narrow the technology innovation in science space. Okay, so I mean we see clearly there's no science-based technological innovation in a proposition, and I agree that the quantum satellite probably is one which is very much basic science achievement. The other is more engineering type, but we all know that engineer innovation coming from basic science, right? So if you don't have the basic science breakthrough, you don't have later on engineering technology innovation. All the way around. So, I mean, sometimes the science breakthrough was inspired by the discovery in the technological innovation and a phenomenon that existing science cannot explain. So it's coming both ways. So then if we look at it, proposition itself, that we would like to see that China indeed has made a lot of breakthrough in these areas. And the 4 points that Dr. Segal mentioned that about the Chinese system, I concur with him to a great extent. I agree with this as a challenge that Chinese policymakers and community should address. For example, that the plagiarism and academic misconduct that's been very disgraceful and is hurting the community, the whole system. But then the other point, for example, the state-owned enterprises. As I've showed that even the state-owned enterprise, some of them are not efficiently managed the fund they receive from government, but we see a large number of the private enterprises has emerging from the competition, become even more competitive ever, developing their novel technologies. So the state-owned enterprises are not without any merit. For example, I prepare a slide which is on the ultra-high voltage electricity transmission technology that's completely developed by state grids, state-owned enterprises, and this technology allowed Chinese and China's grid to run at a voltage that's twice higher as in the United States. So, in terms of the political environment and top-down and a cultural issue. So I would like to quote a new book coming out last year by a colleague in Mark Zachar-Tyler in Georgia Tech. It's about politics of innovation. So that exactly describes that the cultural factor has no explanation power in explaining the nation's performance in science technology, and a political system neither. And so these are not the key issues to determine a country whether you can group in science and technology. They're not. So they have I would say there's a pros and cons with the system. Each system has its pros and cons. So not necessarily a barrier for China to move up in the future. So that's my point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I think Dr. Huang's last point is the right one, that every system, of course, has pros and cons. And what we're seeing, I think, is the end of the pros and the beginnings of the cons as China wants to make this switch from catching up to innovation-driven. I think the issue is not culture in the in the essentialist kind of sense, that there's something in Chinese culture, but there's clearly a scientific and research and education culture that is reinforced by top-down policies and local and provincial policies. So there is, I think, very little correlation. Right? If we looked at Burma and Korea in 1950, most development economists would have told you that Burma was going to be the richest country in Asia, and of course it is not. Korea moved forward. But what we have seen is that in part there were political decisions that were made that helped shape those research and innovation cultures. I think what we've seen in China is a widespread recognition of the need for that, right? If I had given this talk 5 years ago, I would have included the engineering training that Dr. Huang mentioned is still seriously limited in China. If you talk to MNC directors, multinational directors, R&D centers in China, they will tell you that Chinese engineers and scientists are great at solving the problem that you give them. Right, faster than any other group of any other R&D centers in any other parts of the world. They will work 24 hours a day on it, and they will do it faster than anyone else. The issue was that they won't know what to do next. Right? They don't know what the next set of problems should be. They just wait until the next set of challenges are given to them. And part of that has to do about how they are trained in collaboration and research. That, of course, now Fudan knows, Jiaotong knows, Tsinghua knows. They're all trying to develop new centers of engineering that apply to these problems. So culture is a process in many ways. It is changing, but it is certainly not going to change short term. And finally, I'll just end that right now the economic incentives are still very, very high for incremental innovation, right? If you want to make money in China, you can do it by things that are new to the market but not new to the world, right? In big science, innovation, new to the world is high risk, and there's no reason to do it, right? You can still make lots of money doing short-term things.
Okay, great. Now we're going to move on to our Q&A portion before we vote again. Again, please raise your hand, ask a short question, identify yourself, wait till the microphone gets to you. Questions? Yes, right over here.
Bill Jones, Executive Intelligence Review. I have just one question of Adam's complaint about industrial policy as being whether a weakness or a strength. I think definitely it was a strength in the Chinese situation. I think it was definitely a strength in the U.S. situation as well. Our problem in stagnating or in not going as quickly as we could have gone over the last 30 or 40 years was a total lack of industrial policy. Our first industrial policy, I guess, was Hamilton's essay on manufacturing. You look at the Lincoln administration, you look at FDR. When the United States moved forward, they had a certain goal of that. That doesn't mean that the government controls everything. It means that it gives a direction, that it motivates people, that it points in a direction. If you look at President Xi's speech at the recent Congress, the 50-year perspective is giving it a direction. Now that doesn't dot the I's and cross all the T's, and there's going to be a long way to go in order to reach that. But we haven't had that. And our biggest problem is that we have shot ourselves in the foot as a result of this, thinking that the market's going to resolve everything. What happened to our space program? What happened to NASA? Kennedy launched that program, and we had just a flurry of technological innovations for decades. And we've lost that. Unless we get back to that, we're not going to be able to deal with China. I think we can work with China on that if we move in that direction. I don't think it's a problem. But if we keep going the way we're going and start blaming China, we're going to end up in a lot of problems, and we'll never solve the problem.
Well, luckily, Bonnie did not give me the project of defending the U.S. system, because I would have definitely said no. But I was perhaps inelegant in my point. I'm not arguing that industrial policy cannot be useful in innovation, and clearly it was. I'm trying to argue that the Chinese are now entering a different stage. And the system that they built, which was effective for, again, incremental manufacturing innovation, will not be effective for this new stage, which is based on just a much higher degree of uncertainty, right? Because it is so science-based that we really have little understanding of where the market is going to be. Anyone who tells you that they know that AI is going to be dominated by the big three or the big four 5 years from now doesn't really know what was going to happen. Somebody yesterday was circulating a picture on Twitter about Nokia as being the most important technology company in the world. The picture was 10 years old, right? So to have some sense of what the companies are going to be and which technologies, I think, the uncertainty is much higher. And I think the Chinese have built a system that worked for the last 20 years, but it will not work for what's coming next.
Okay, yes, you can add something?
Yeah, so I would like to discuss with Dr. Adams about this point. Because last year, in the National Innovation Convention, that's only 2 CEOs are invited to give a speech in front of Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang and top political leaders. One is that from a CEO from state-owned enterprises, launching satellite and so on. The other is the CEO of Huawei, the founder of CEO Ren Zhengfei. So in his speech, he clearly described that the Huawei now is in a no man's zone. As you said, he said because if you move to a technology frontier, you have no target to catch up. Because you are the frontier, then you have to look around. There's no man's zone, no other competitors around you. Then I think this is novel, as you said. This has been a novel phenomenon just happening in this last year, this year, couple of years. A time that a lot of Chinese companies are moving into the technology frontier, and that's opposed, as you said. I agree, that's a challenge for policy making. So what do you need in this new normal, new era if you have a lot of companies coming to the technological frontier? And I think we will find a way to solve that. Either the problem education system, either problem funding system, either problem of the industry policy, we will find a way. Previously, we don't see the issue. That's no problem because 20 years ago, that's catching up. We see the target. But now we're on a frontier. We have to play a different game. Maybe as the US, we should learn from US even more than ever, right?
Okay, we're going to go to the woman in the back right there.
I'm Fei Yu from the Asian Development Bank. So I have 2 questions. So one is the industrial policy part. We have to think of this in terms of this is a dynamic situation. It's not static. So China is trying to get into some space that is traditionally not strong in. For example, in the semiconductor industry, if you look at private investment or anybody's investment initiatives, you see money losing for 20 years or the odds of success is not very high. So in this kind of situation, whether industrial policy, whether the ability to be able to take on an initiative and sustain a loss is an advantage or not for innovation, it's a question for up to debate. I'd like to hear your comments about that. Second question is about intellectual property rights. So as China is going into new fields, new industries, there will be even not as strong as conflicts, but there will be friction with companies that are controlling large amounts of patents and intellectual property in the space that China is trying to get into. So this is a huge challenge for China. How is China going to deal with this?
So about the first question, and indeed I agree with you that the industry policy will not be successful in every occasion when they are used. I mean, nobody going to expect that industry policy can have impact positively in every case when they are employing. But I would like to highlight a fact that in China, you probably know that economy is a decentralized economy. It's run by provincial governments. The central government has no say in everything in terms of economic operation and activity. So the local government, the provincial city government play a major role. They are like actors enacting their own policies. A lot of these policies, of course, fail because the government is exactly as a company. They have a limited information. There are a lot of uncertainty. The policy they bet on the emerging technology, they will fail. But then these experiments will have a positive impact in the overall, in the macro level, because you see hundreds of cities, maybe a dozen of provinces are doing their own policy making, and some of them will fail definitely. But if there's one of them or two of them successful, then other provinces, other government can learn from that. And it creates signal. So I think that industry policy in this sense, in a decentralized system, it have a good impact, can have a good impact. And a second question about IP. The Li Keqiang and the top official Chinese governments since last several years ago has stressed every occasion that China will have a even more stringent IP protection when they talk with the director of WIPO and other international officials, because that's also China's interest, has a stronger IP protection, because as the company moving to the technology frontier, as they become more innovative, generate more R&D outcome, they naturally call for greater protections. So I think it's in China's interest, also in the international multinational companies' interest, that China continue to strengthen protection of IP in the years to come.
So I agree with Dr. Huang that clearly the decentralized nature of the Chinese system is a great strength, and it allows a huge amount of experimentation. So then the central government can go back and say, this one worked, this one didn't. The flip side on the negative is that there's a huge amount of herd mentality, right? So everyone is going to want an AI high-tech zone. Everyone's going to want a civil military fusion center, and there's going to be a huge amount of repetition and redundancy, which is going to lead to waste. And especially with AI, where talent is going to matter so much, there's just no way there's enough talent to do these things. When I was doing the original research for my first book, and I would visit all these high-tech zones, and everyone, of course, said they were on the cutting edge. And I would basically say, well, as a kind of way to figure out if the person was going to be somewhat honest with me or not, I would say, why does Tibet have a high-tech zone? And if they would start talking to me about some mold or fungus that they were growing on the tundra that was going to be the massive breakthrough for Tibet, I knew that the interview was going to be a wash. So there's going to be a lot of waste, I think, that's going to happen, and we're going to see it in the thing there. I think with IP, part of the problem is, yes, there's an increasing focus on protection, and as Dr. Huang's own research has shown, on IP patent filing. A lot of that, unfortunately, is driven by government incentives, right? You get grants and other breaks if you file the IP patents. And so some of it is, very unreflective of any real change. It's just there. And a lot of it is also preparing companies to battle European and US companies in courts, right? To either drive down licensing fees or to basically to involved in kind of trolling kind of patent kind of battle. So it's not necessarily reflective of a greater insight or protection of intellectual property.
One footnote.
Yeah, one footnote. There's one addition to that that IP the landscape in China is that China has strengthened significantly the enforcement, because enforcement has been weak in history. So China built up 3 IP specialized courts in Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangdong, and this court handling out the high-profile damage after the infringement trial. So this has been very positive sign for the IP right holders, either multinational firm or Chinese firms.
Okay, right here in the front.
Thank you. Lucy Hughes from the British Embassy, and thank you very much for these really interesting remarks. I wanted to ask a question which is slightly out of scope, building on what Senator Cornyn said this morning. Adam, you were right. He did talk about China's innovation as being a threat to the US. Is that right? If China does emerge as a leader, what does that mean for the US and the international community?
Yes and no. So, from a purely scientific and economic perspective, shouldn't matter at all, quite honestly, right? The more innovation that happens, the better it is for the world. I don't really care that the aspirin was invented by German scientists. I'm just glad we have it. And so you can imagine lots and lots of breakthroughs that would happen the same way. I think the issue becomes more complicated when we think about I suspect reciprocity came up in the discussion. When we're thinking about where the U.S. has built a science and technology system that was built on openness and the free flow of people and ideas, and China's system is not built that way. And so I do think there are questions about who captures those gains economically, and clearly on the military side, I think there are real worries in lots of dual-use technologies. So I think the U.S. has the argument that the U.S. has made, which is one that I have made many times, is that the U.S. should continue to try to run faster, not to slow other people down. And that has traditionally meant maintaining our openness, going back to the gentleman's earlier discussion about funding basic research in science and technology, and having, if not an industrial policy in the European or Chinese sense, at least some sense of what those goals are. I still think that's the right strategy, except for a very, very narrow band of technologies that we have to worry about. AI, it's very unclear about where that's going to fit. Because so much of that is going to be foundational kind of module kind of things that will fit into military systems and fit into civilian systems, and that is going to be very hard to control.
Did you want to add anything? Okay. All right. There was a question, this gentleman standing in the back. There's one where? I can't see.
Well, we've talked very generally. I was wondering if we should talk to some specifics, namely what are the technology innovations we want in the future. And see, the most important ones are in robotics, in medical stem cell research, and I think AI has been mentioned. So considering these specifics, what has China done today and predicted in the future in these specific fields?
Okay, China wants all fields that United States wants. Because we are watching the leader, right? We are watching, if you are next to the leader, the easiest way to do is to watching what other people are doing, right? So then that there was systematic foresight exercise in China, systematic analysis what other countries' programs are, what their strengths and weaknesses, and what China can learn from that. And definitely this is science technology policy making in China. That's my answer.
Okay, there's a question over here, which is a bit blocked by the podium, but thank you. You can always stand up and wave your hands. Go ahead, identify yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Jake Myers. I'm with RWR Advisory Group. Around a decade ago, 1 in 4 Chinese students abroad weren't returning to China. Now it's around 15%. Has this brain drain caused a big impact on the well, for Adam, has it stopped the technology innovation within China or slowed it down? And for Dr. Huang, how is China going to stop this or reduce the brain drain? Thank you.
Okay, if you didn't hear that question, it's about the impact of the brain drain on Chinese innovation. Either one of you would like to take that?
Yeah, I can take it.
Okay, Dr. Huang.
I can give a first shot. So brain drain is not the word at this moment. At this moment, people talk about brain circulation because the return Chinese students at a record high. I don't remember the concrete figure, but when I went abroad and 15 years ago, that was a very small, very small number compared to today's returnees. And people were talking about that Chinese students went abroad and spent a huge fortune on their tuition fee. They came back, find a job with a meager salary, which is not good investment. That demonstrates that so many people coming back, the market was saturated for the returnees. So nowadays it's not about brain drain, it's about brain circulation and what these people, they were lured by the opportunity, career opportunity back in China. And they are being established in Silicon Valley, in the Boston area. They work in high-tech firms. They are lured by the Chinese company back home to work in China. Yeah.
So it in many cases has had a very positive impact, right? Especially we've had a number of very high-profile scientists come back, funded by the Chinese government or large grants in robotics and AI, biogenomics. And the impact there is, goes to some of the cultural factors that I was mentioning before. These are people that have operated in US or European labs. They're used to encouraging graduate students to question and do their own research, right, which is not what happens in Chinese labs. They're used to outside evaluation, which members of the Chinese Academy of Science don't like. Right? They've already been elected as academicians. They're not going to go through any more evaluation. So they bring a more transparent system there. And they are also used to more collaborative research, both with other labs and with industry. The issue has been the numbers and what stage their career they're in and how do they integrate. So some of the numbers seem to suggest that people go either at the very beginning of their careers or the very end of their careers. So very productive scientists already in the States or in Europe don't leave, right? Or if they do, they go for a month and they say that they have a lab because they're quite happy here and they know that they can't get everything that they want on the Chinese sides. Very young scientists go because funding is not all that forthcoming here, and there's lots of money there, and there's lots of opportunities, and lots of older scientists go because they want to be near family, and they get a big chunk of payment again, which they wouldn't get at the end of their salary. Integrating those scientists into the current systems has been rocky. There's been jealousy issues about these large payments. Some of the people aren't really there when they're supposed to be there. They say they're there. And some of them have had kind of clashed heads again over evaluation and R&D distribution.
Okay, let's take one in the back right there.
Hi, Andrew Stebbins. I'm an engineer out in Silicon Valley, whereas we've heard much of the engineering and practical innovation is driven by small startup companies. And on that note, my question is, to what extent the current academic, business, and political climate in China is conducive to starting and building a startup tech company, and to what extent the startup scene in China will drive China's position going forward as a global tech leader?
It was about I think the question was about the emergence of the startup culture in China and how that's driving innovation. Yeah.
So I'm coming from Hangzhou, which is the Alibaba headquarters is located. So I can testify that in Hangzhou, there were emerging ecosystem of the internet-based companies. The Alibaba success and ex-employees that are leaving the firm and set up their own startups has been inspirational for not only for the people in Hangzhou, but for all Chinese, even for Silicon Valley people, Chinese working in Silicon Valley. They come back to Hangzhou to look for Hangzhou as an ideal place to start their own business on internet-related business. So I think the more successful the Chinese tech company and give them more inspiration for the Chinese young students and young people to start out their own business. Yeah. But also the other fact is the government has been pushing very hard what is called massive entrepreneurship program. That every university has opened their entrepreneurship college to educate the students about entrepreneurship and so on. So whether we can debate whether there's an impact on that, but this is a trend. It's an overall trend. It's beefing up the entrepreneurial activities in China.
Hangzhou would be only one of the places where these are emerging. Guizhou, because it focuses on cloud, I think they're trying to create similar environment. I do think, I haven't seen the most recent surveys, but there was still lots of university graduates still want to go to state-owned enterprises instead of starting their own companies. So the mindset, I think, is not fully grabbed. And I also think, as I mentioned in my comments, the government's increasing desire to control the tech industry is squeezing some of that space, either through having to have party cells at any company over 50 employees, and also the taking of shares in companies. So I think that will squeeze that environment a little bit. And again, I think most of the incentives are short term. You move out and you do what you think can quickly either sell to Alibaba or another big company, not at the cutting edge on the scientific frontier.
Okay. Gentleman right here at this table.
Jacob Votter with FEMA, and this might seem a bit of a reach question, but in the 70s and 80s, I'm sorry, 80s and 90s, we saw a lot of privatization occur in Western and Japanese state firms. And what do you see the prospects for privatization of state-owned enterprises in China, and how that would impact innovation there? Thank you.
Okay, I'll take first. So the enterprises has been privatized in a big wave in the end of 1990s. So what now is left a very big one, gigantic one. I don't see there were in the 19th Party's Congress the discussion about privatizing these large state-owned enterprise. We don't see that. So I think probably they will remain as the current modes, and the government try to reform that in a way to push the joint ownership program, but has not been well received by the market yet. So pretty much I will see that a lot of innovation will coming from the private company as they are become more innovative and competitive and more international. And state-owned company, as I said, they were also a major force in the innovation in China because they are a very large company and they are also develop military technologies and so on. So there will be an important force, but we can see the other players also strengthen their role.
Okay, we'll take one last question, the woman in the back corner.
Hi, I'm Louisa Chang. I'm an independent researcher. I have a question for both our speakers. So a popular theme on Chinese social media when Tu Xixi received her Nobel in China pointed out that, and this is in Chinese social media, it pointed out that every single one of China's Nobel laureates in the sciences received their formative education before 1949, and a lot of them, subsequently abroad. And there's a very open criticism in that very popular topic about the PRC educational system. So if you can talk about, going forward, the implications of how to reform that educational system and the political underpinnings of it. Thank you.
Okay, maybe you can extend that to relationship between educational system and innovation. Dr. Huang?
Yeah, I think the Chinese education system is not meant to educate only Nobel Prize laureate. It's meant to educate the massive number of the young people. And the reason I think China has only one science Nobel Prize winner so far is because the science technology was really backwards, in the past. You have to wait 20, 30 years to gain the prize. Huh? So then, which means that you did a work in 70s now and the 60s. So at that time, China is a cultural revolution. That's, of course, they don't produce many prize winners. But now, what about 2050? Right? If there were labs condition in China now is in a world class, how about the young Chinese scientists now working in these labs? Can they win Nobel Prize in 20, 30 years of time? Very likely, just as happened in Japan and other catching up economies.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I would just add that you often also win Nobel in the sciences for developing processes that help other people in their inventions and innovations. And so some of that work may be happening now in some of these large top-down processes where the Chinese are making breakthrough that's based on innovation, resources and data and people. And so we just haven't seen it yet because it is early in the time span.
This has really been an outstanding discussion, so I really want to thank our speakers. We're now going to give all of you an opportunity once again to vote, and we started out with a great disparity. We will see whether that disparity, whether the gap has indeed narrowed. The question again is, in the coming decade, China will emerge as a global leader in technology innovation. And you all have the opportunity to answer yes or no. Okay, cast your votes. We'll give you another 15, 20 seconds for anybody who wishes to vote on this proposition.
Greater than 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, it's less than 100%. But we get to ignore the C's and D's who obviously just don't want to take a position. The gap has really narrowed quite a bit, though. We now have 53% to 46%, whereas we started out 65% to 34%. But really, a fascinating discussion. I really learned a lot. I hope all of you did. Please join me in thanking our debaters.